listening to President Trump and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer speak at this news conference here at the Chequers estate of the Prime Ministers there, taking a wide range of questions from reporters in the room. I want to bring in our NBC News senior White House correspondent, Gabe Gutierrez, who's traveling overseas with the president. And Gabe, you heard everything from the assassination of Charlie Kirk, reaction there, the late night show, Jimmy Kimmel getting pulled off the air here in the United States, to these key international topics, the two wars overseas, with President Trump saying that he believes that Vladimir Putin of Russia let him down, seeming to suggest, when asked if that Alaska summit was a mistake, seeming to say no briefly. And critically here on this issue of obviously the war in Gaza, Prime Minister Keir Starmer is potentially just days away, the expectation is, from recognizing the Palestinian state. The timing seems to have more to do with the United Nations General Assembly, which happens next week in New York, as Starmer has previously said, but obviously a real point of distinction and dissent between these two nations after a news conference and a trip, frankly, that was meant to show their very close relationship.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. Look, the Prime Minister clearly came prepared for that question. He started off by trying to find common ground between the two countries, saying that they both wanted peace and the hostages released. But then when President Trump spoke about it, he also said that he wanted the hostages released now. But he did, at the end of his answer, talk about how he disagreed with the Prime Minister over the issue of Palestinian statehood. So that was notable. And as you mentioned, Hallie, there were a number of other topics here, ranging from the war in Ukraine. The president also mentioning that he wanted the U.S. to take Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan back. He has mentioned something like that before. He seemed to go a little bit further this time, although he didn't offer any plan on that. And he also was asked about the ABC network pulling Jimmy Kimmel off the air. He said that in his view that Kimmel had been fired for low ratings. However, critics of the administration have raised a lot of questions about free speech when it comes to that decision on the part of ABC. The president also saying that he planned to speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping tomorrow to try and find some sort of deal on TikTok, Hallie.
Gabe, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to stand by. I want to see if we have our Peter Alexander, our chief White House correspondent, who was in the room for that news conference. He is getting ready to stand up and bring that microphone to his mouth, Gabe. So I'll hang with you for a second here, and let's pick up on the TikTok thread, because this, on the heels of this very critical international state visit, you now have another important conversation that is set to happen tomorrow at the highest levels between the U.S. and China when the president does speak with Xi Jinping. The TikTok deal, but there are plenty of other topics that could come up in that conversation, no?
Yeah, certainly. Of course, the issue of tariffs, for example, that is something that loomed large over this meeting with the Prime Minister here in the UK. Didn't quite so much go into it in this press conference. However, while the President and the Prime Minister spoke about the trade deal that they had reached, the Prime Minister had been trying to get a better deal when it comes to steel and aluminum tariffs as well. And still, there are a lot of questions about further economic cooperation between the two leaders. The president and the prime minister announcing heading into this news conference that both countries had agreed to more economic cooperation, AI investments, American companies such as Microsoft and OpenAI promising to invest billions of dollars in the UK. But certainly the issue of tariffs sure to come up when President Trump speaks with the Chinese president tomorrow. The president saying for the first time that he planned to do so. But again, saying that conversation would largely focus on this TikTok deal and suggesting that there could be some sort of an extension to the terms that are currently in place, Hallie.
Gabe, we've talked about some of the international headlines here. On the domestic front, I think people by now know about Jimmy Kimmel's show getting pulled off the air by ABC after pushback from local broadcast affiliate group stations, essentially, different ownership groups here. And it was notable to hear the president react to this. We had seen him obviously on Truth Social. Here he is on camera being asked about it. And he is suggesting that Kimmel was suspended, in effect, for what he described as lack of talent. Just to put some context around that, the suspension, the indefinite postponement of Kimmel's show came just hours after one of the FCC chairs talked about concerns over Kimmel's comments related to Charlie Kirk, and specifically suggested that there may be further punitive action from the government to those stations, right?
Yeah, certainly. And look, some ownership groups such as Nexstar and Sinclair, which own a large amount of local affiliates throughout the country, had expressed their displeasure with Jimmy Kimmel's comments. In a monologue earlier this week, Kimmel had joked about President Trump's reaction to Charlie Kirk's murder, but he had also suggested that perhaps MAGA had somehow, that the suspected shooter may have been part of the MAGA movement, even though authorities had said that he was part of left-leaning ideology. So that a lot of conservatives were very upset by that. The FCC chair said in a podcast that we could either do this the easy way or the hard way. And a short time after that, ABC Network made the decision to pull Kimmel off the air. Now, overnight, the White House, its rapid response team, have posted that Kimmel was, quote, a sick freak, and the president choosing after midnight here London time, deciding it was important enough to make his own social media post about this and suggesting that some other late-night host should be pulled off the air as well. So certainly the president commenting on that very briefly, even though critics of the administration have raised a lot of questions about what this means for free speech down the line now.
You heard those questions, free speech in the U.S. and free speech in the U.K., with the Prime Minister responding in a couple of instances to that. Also worth noting here, Gabe, how Keir Starmer, in response to nearly every question, wrapped his answers by alluding to the strong and close relationship that he and President Trump had. You could tell that it was critical for him to get that message out. So, for example, talking about their private conversations, two leaders one-on-one who respect and like each other. That was another theme that Starmer really tried to weave in here, and rather intentionally.
Yeah, certainly. It's the Prime Minister really going out of his way to make it clear that he had a very strong partnership with President Trump. And that's something that the royal family did yesterday during that white tie banquet last night, trying to emphasize this partnership. And something we've seen how they really, from many world leaders that have adopted that playbook on either flattering President Trump or really going out of their way to try to, showcase their common ground, something that the president has been very receptive to. So it is this, distinctive that President Trump, even though, and he responded even when he disagreed with Prime Minister Starmer, it was still a very cordial news conference, and really overall a very successful visit on the view from the UK, especially with all those investments announced, but also there was no major disagreement that spilled out into public view between the two leaders, and there was an immense amount of pomp and circumstance, pomp and pageantry yesterday. And despite there being some protests here in central London, the royal family and the British government seems to have accomplished what they wanted to do, to get through this visit and to shower praise on President Trump and perhaps get some economic investment and nudge him perhaps on any developments with tariffs, Hallie.
Gabe, standing by for us there outside Buckingham Palace. Gabe, I'm going to ask you to hang tight for a second. I want to go back to Checkers now, where our chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander, is joining us. Peter, you were in the room for that news conference. You've been having the conversation with Gabe on some of the headlines and picking up on one of those threads. This is coming as the British Prime Minister is facing his own political pressures there in the UK. You heard that come up with, for example, the question on Lord Mandelson, of course, the UK ambassador to the U.S., who was just fired days ago for his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
NATO airspace. And, of course, the president at the time after...
I think that's right. I think, just to pull back the curtain, was we just rushed out from inside that news conference. What struck me in particular was the president's words as it related to Russia right now. At the end of that news conference, he was pressed by a member of the British press specifically about why this isn't the right time to squeeze Putin, to do more in terms of sanctions. I was looking back at some of the data points, Hallie, and since we were traveling, I was traveling with the president and Vladimir Putin when they were together in Alaska. There has been a spike in Russian missile strikes inside Ukraine. The president today spoke about how by starting this war, Russia was disrespecting his predecessor, President Biden. But we're now 8 months into this war, and in effect, it seems like it's President Trump whose effort to try to end the fighting is being disrespected by Vladimir Putin. The president, though, despite giving many opportunities to say something about it, despite more than 2 weeks ago saying within 2 weeks he would be able to make a decision to know if Vladimir Putin was serious about this, today he just said basically that he is disappointed that he has been let down by Vladimir Putin, but did not make any indication that he was willing to do anything more to crack down on Russia right now. In fact, we left there with the only pressure being on European allies not to buy Russian oil, instead of the pressure, as it was presented to President Trump, being on him to perhaps do more to try to change the situation given this moment.
Yeah, Peter, and just because you mentioned pulling back the curtain, I know you just literally raced out, got in front of a camera. I can only imagine there's a line of reporters next to you. We're hearing some of that audio kind of come through, and I just want folks to understand that that's why that's happening. When you talk about these major international issues, one of the things that we just discussed with Gabe is this tension and this differentiation as you see a live look at the folks breaking down there at Checkers, Peter. But between the U.S. and the U.K., when it comes to what's happening in Gaza, when it comes to recognition of a Palestinian state, which the U.K. Prime Minister is expected to do just days from now, he clearly, at least per his telling, talked about this with President Trump in their private one-on-one.
Yeah, that's right. And President Trump has been very clear his position on this. He has said that before there can be any serious conversation about recognizing a Palestinian state, about even discussing the future for those Palestinian people there needs to be a return of the dozens of remaining hostages, some dead, some still alive, being held by Hamas, in many cases underground there in Gaza. So the president's position has been clear on this. There is certainly a view here in the United Kingdom that, as the prime minister indicated, that they want to try to do a bit more to push along this process to recognize Palestine as an independent state there. But as Keir Starmer tried to make very clear, even acknowledging that he has extended family in Israel, he says he does not in any way dismiss the horrific things that have been perpetrated by Hamas fighters, first on October 7th and in the months since. Hallie, just to go back again, I think there were a series of other questions that didn't get addressed here. And frankly, the way this was sort of framed, there were only a limited number of questions from American reporters, some of them viewed as more sympathetic to the president. But one of the key questions right now, I think, given the conversation we're having at home, the divisions following the assassination of Charlie Kirk, relates to speech and the president's view on the topic of free speech, one of the founding principles of our democracy, now approaching 250 years ago. And I think while the president said that Jimmy Kimmel was dismissed, he said because of bad ratings. We know it wasn't bad ratings for which he was dismissed. In fact, he was dismissed following pressure from the FCC chairman. And there has been a lot of organizations, both media, law firms, universities, that have, some would suggest, capitulated to this president. So I would have been curious to hear the president press a little bit more on the topic of speech here, where he draws the line in terms of what speech is acceptable. Is speech, in his words, acceptable if it is critical of him or of his allies? It's a question that didn't get posed to him here. Instead, as you saw, one of the questions from a more sympathetic reporter focused on the topic of the auto pen, an issue that is now many years in the past right now, when I think there are certainly some real pressing issues that Americans are looking for answers to.
It was a UK reporter, I think, who did ask the Kimmel free speech question, right? Was I mistaken on that?
There was a question. It was initially asked
from the UK side,
right? The British Prime Minister asking.
Right.
Yep, you're exactly right. And the president, to be clear, the president wasn't pressed on it much further. But the question is, does the president sort of claim credit for Jimmy Kimmel's dismissal, as it were, or his extended suspension at this time? He wasn't pressed on that. Instead, as he looked over to his aides for approval, as he sort of mocked Kimmel for his ratings there. But it was notable that the president on that particular topic did sort of lean in on that. And as it relates more broadly, I think there were a lot of questions as it relates to some comments that Pam Bondi had to walk back, specifically about hate speech, saying they'll be targeting those who use hate speech. All Americans agree that speech that is used to incite violence is not acceptable. But where does the president draw the line in terms of language that is demonstrating disagreements, criticism, and beyond? And that's part of what is a very delicate and difficult debate that I think the country is facing right now.
I would also note, too, that there is a backdrop of this that even predates the current conversation specifically related to the assassination of Charlie Kirk here. When it comes to the president, and he's been asked about this before, wanting to, for example, look at banning flag burning in this country, obviously something that is a protected move according to the Supreme Court. He had been previously asked about this and noted the difficulty in trying to do something like that, considering that is constitutionally protected. This free speech conversation, I bring this up, Peter, to say, has been going on for some time in this current administration.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I just emphasize the different examples that we've now seen. The latest one taking place in the last 24 hours that draw a lot of Americans' attentions to this. But it's not just, the community and the media world. It's, as we said, law firms, universities, and beyond. They're sort of experiencing what some describe in those communities as a bit of a chilling effect right now in terms of what is okay and not okay to say. I think those are some of the biggest takeaways. Some others that may not get the real headlines here. We watched that glamorous, glitzy, glittering banquet that took place at Windsor Castle yesterday, and it got a lot of sort of lavish. The president was praised, and the pageantry was there to help sort of fet him. But all that was done by design, Hal. Really an effort to grease the wheels for some of the tougher conversations, the discussions that take place behind closed doors here amid some of the differences that the two leaders face as it relates to foreign policy, Gaza and Ukraine, and to the topic of trade. On the topic of trade, the United Kingdom, and King Charles even alluded to this in his remarks last night, pushed for a better agreement between the United States and the UK that would roll back tariffs a bit further, pushed for a release of the stiff tariffs that the U.S. has imposed on British steel imports that account for about 1/10 of the foreign sales that the UK provides of steel around the globe right now.
Yep.
Those did not get as much attention here, but it does give you a better understanding when you put today's events in the framework of what we saw last night. They love feting a foreign leader, but they had never done anything like this, and they do recognize that the president sort of craves the adulation and the celebration, as he himself said, being the first ever president, the first ever world leader to enjoy a second state visit. He said it was one of the highest honors of his life.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.